What is going on, everybody? This is MYG Jeffy T 3285, and I'm just here to recap some of the news, notes, nuggets, observations, and of course, injury and roster news that have surrounded the New York Football Giants as we head into the final preseason game tomorrow at 1 p.m. at MetLife Stadium against the New York Jets. Now, some of the news and notes that have been happening around the New York Giants this past week. Of course, first we start with some of the transactional moves that have happened with the Giants today. And, of course, with the New York Giants the past few days. We all know that the New York Giants have been shuffling around their roster due to a lot of injuries that have been happening on this team throughout the beginning and, of course, the course of the training camp and preseason. Of course, we lost a couple of players this past week in Colin Johnson, who ended up tearing his Achilles a couple of days ago at practice, and he is now out for the season. As well as we lost Darian Beavers towards the middle of the game against the Cincinnati Bengals, the preseason game number 2, and he's also going to be out for the season due to a torn ACL. So that's a couple of depth pieces the New York Giants are going to be missing this year when it comes to the 2022 NFL season. So some of the transactional moves the New York Giants have made is, just yesterday, the New York Giants actually ended up releasing veteran safety Andrew Adams because they figured they want to try to see what some of the young safeties have to do. And guys like Trenton Thompson, as well as Yusuf Corker, have been playing very well when it came to training camp as well as the preseason. And the Giants wanted to see what some of these guys can do. Want to see what some of these young players can do during the season. So they ended up releasing Andrew Adams, and it also could be an indication that third-round rookie out of Iowa, safety Dane Belton, might be closer to a return to the field than many might have anticipated at first after he broke his collarbone towards the beginning of training camp back in early August. So that's a good sign right there that the New York Giants are finally starting to get a little more healthy at the safety position especially, and that they're putting a little bit of faith in some of the young safeties out there for the New York Giants going forward. So hopefully this means that Dane Belton is going to be on his way back to the New York Giants roster, as well as they must like what they see from Trenton Thompson and Yusuf Corker. Mainly I think it's more Trenton Thompson because I believe he's been seeing a lot more snaps with the second team, as well as some snaps with third team, but he's actually been seeing some more second team snaps than Yusuf Corker, and he's been playing a little bit more in the middle of preseason games, whereas Corker, he's mainly been playing more towards the end of the preseason game. So that might be an indication the Giants might like what they see in terms of his coverage as well as his instincts on the field with Trenton Thompson more than Yusuf Corker, and they might want to give a chance to some of these younger guys in the safety position going forward. So I'm not at all against something like that. It's a rebuilding year, first year in the Brian Daboll, Joe Schoen era. Why not see what some of these young players can do? And why not you throw out there a Trenton Thompson, as well as see if Dane Belton can come back from that collarbone injury that he suffered, and see if he can be able to make it back by week 1, if not the latest week 2. Throw him out there and see what these guys can do behind, obviously, starting safeties Xavier McKinney and Julian Love going into the beginning of the 2022 NFL season. Now, in some of the moves that they made, the New York Giants made in transaction to the Andrew Adams release yesterday, is they ended up bringing back kicker Ryan Santoso, as well as they brought back wide receiver Travis Toivonen, who was released earlier this training camp about a couple of weeks ago due to some of the just the logjam at wide receiver the New York Giants have had so far. And right now, the New York Giants believe that Ryan Santoso has come back because of the fact that we all know Garrett Mcginnon suffered a concussion injury while trying to play coverage, while trying to be on the coverage unit for a kickoff return against the Cincinnati Bengals this past Sunday in the second preseason game. And we have to believe that Mcginnon might be a little bit longer away when it comes to his potential return to the team. So this might be the reason why the New York Giants ended up bringing back Santoso, is they're going to need a guy that's going to be able to be the kicker for the last game of the preseason against the New York Jets on Sunday. So that's probably the reason why the New York Giants ended up bringing back Ryan Santoso, because they need themselves a place kicker that could take over the duties of a guy like Garrett Mcginnon until he gets 100%, and he's going to be making his way out of concussion protocol for the New York Giants going forward. So that's a good sign, at least, that the New York Giants were able to bring back a familiar face to the kicking unit going forward. So hopefully Graham Gano is going to be able to make it back 100%. And hopefully Ryan Santoso maybe could show enough where he could be a guy that maybe he could be able to make the practice squad going forward for the New York Giants. So that's just something that we have to look to see going forward with the New York Giants. So now in terms of some of the injuries, we all know there's a lot of injuries with this New York Giants team. So in terms of the injuries going into tomorrow's game against the New York Jets and what players have been ruled out so far for the New York Giants for the game tomorrow afternoon against the New York Jets. Right now, these players that have been ruled out are as followed. Wide receivers Sterling Shepard and C.J. Board. As we know, Sterling Shepard came off the PUP list earlier this week, but the Giants are probably just taking it easy with him, not putting too much on his table. C.J. Board ended up hurting his ribs during the second preseason game, so they're probably being cautious with him. Obviously, Shane Lemieux, who's been dealing with a foot injury since the first preseason game, he's not going to be playing, as well as offensive lineman Josh Ezeudu, Ben Bredesen, and Garrett Mcginnon. Obviously, Ezeudu, he's been dealing with an undisclosed injury. He did make his way back to practice, but I guess the New York Giants are holding him out right now, as well as Ben Bredesen for the beginning of the regular season. So they probably want to hold these guys out. Garrett Mcginnon, he's pretty much been a camp body this whole time. I don't even think he's going to make the team at all, but he's not going to be playing. Obviously, we know what happened to Kayvon Thibodeau. He ended up getting hit in the knee. Dirty play as it is, but he ended up getting hit in the knee during the second preseason game against the Bengals. He's going to be out for at least 3 to 4 weeks, so about a month's timeline. Might be ready by the beginning of the season, but I would not be surprised if the New York Giants end up holding him out until at least the second or third week of the NFL season. So Thibodeau is right now nursing a knee injury, and as we saw a couple of days ago, Azeez Ojulari ended up having to leave with trainers after he got banged up towards the end of the practice running sprints, and it actually ends up being he suffered a calf injury during that during the end of that training camp practice on Thursday. And the New York Giants right now don't know what his status is going forward for the beginning of the regular season. So there's a possibility that the New York Giants might be going into the beginning of the regular season with 3 of their 4 top outside linebackers right now all uncertain going into the beginning of the season. Also, Ellison Smith, who is not going to be playing in this last preseason game, he's been dealing with a foot and ankle injury that he suffered last week during the training camp. So that's 3 guys in the training at the outside linebacker position that are probably big-time question marks going into the beginning of the season. Also, that's not going to be attending during the preseason finale is cornerback Rodarius Williams, who we all know is who's coming back from a torn ACL that he suffered at the middle of the season last year for the New York Giants. So they're probably just easing his reps back in and not throwing too much out there. And would not be surprised if he misses maybe a game or 2 at the beginning of the season while they try to get him right for the beginning of the season going forward. And then, of course, the 2 guys I mentioned earlier in the video, Dane Belton, who's working his way back from a broken collarbone. He did have his sling removed earlier last week, and he might be on his way back by the beginning of the season, but there's really no guarantee he's going to be ready by the beginning of the season. So Dane Belton right now is a question mark for the New York Giants, but he's right now not going to be playing that last preseason game, and obviously we know Graham Gano will not be participating as well in that last preseason game, as he's been dealing with a concussion injury, and that's why the New York Giants brought in Ryan Santoso before. So that's just the injury update right now, as well as a couple of guys that are going to be questionable. Kadarius Toney, who's making his way back from a knee/hamstring injury. He did participate yesterday in the joint practices against the New York Jets. I'll get to that in a second. As well as Darius Slayton, he's questionable as well. He's been dealing with some leg injuries. He might not be participating in this game. They just have him deemed questionable, though I think it might be best if he tries to get on the field, but we'll have to see. As well as Jihad Ward, who also left with a foot injury. He's also questionable for the game. So that's just the New York Giants injury report. The guys that will not be in the game are Sterling Shepard, C.J. Board, Shane Lemieux, Joshua Ezeudu, Ben Bredesen, Garrett Mcginnon, Kayvon Thibodeau, Azeez Ojulari, Ellison Smith, Rodarius Williams, Dane Belton, and Graham Gano. They have all been ruled out for the preseason finale against the New York Jets, and questionable right now for the game are Kadarius Toney, Darius Slayton, and Jihad Ward. Now, in terms of Shane Lemieux, I know I mentioned he's not going to be participating in the preseason finale. Brian Dable actually did his press conference yesterday at the podium, and he actually said that right now Shane Lemieux is nowhere near returning, and he's not going to be coming back anytime soon. So that pretty much is just an indication that he will be ruled out for the first game of the season for the New York Giants. So do not expect Shane Lemieux to be ready for the first regular season game against the Tennessee Titans on September 11th for the New York Giants. And also Brian Daboll even went as far as saying that the New York Giants starting left guard might not even be on the current roster. As we know, Joshua Zudu has been battling injury, and while we like some of the things we've seen from Devery Hamilton, he is also a guy that just started getting reps at left guard, and we don't even know what this guy is going to be yet, as he struggled a little bit with some of his reps during joint practice against the New York Jets. So we have to see what is going to be the plan for the New York Giants in terms of the left guard position going into the season, as you don't ever want to hear about guys that are missing time, especially in the offensive line. You don't want non-continuity when it comes to that position. So we'll have to see what's going to happen going forward in terms of the left guard position for the New York Giants. Now, in terms of some of the things that we've seen at joint practice this past Thursday, one of the things that we all liked for seeing from the joint practices, Daniel Jones came out looking really good at joint practice. He was 14 for 16. He was hitting all his targets. He was looking very good and comfortable in the pocket for the New York Giants going into that joint practice going forward. So we have to love what we see right now from Daniel Jones. It looks like he's finally getting adjusted and he's getting into a rhythm right now in Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka's offense. So we love seeing that right now. We love hearing the type of production that Daniel Jones is showing. Now I know, give it a grain of salt. It's practice, it's training camp, we all know. But right now, Daniel Jones, especially what we saw in the preseason game, yes, it was against the second team, but Daniel Jones seems to be getting into a rhythm right now with the New York Giants in terms of this Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll offense right now for the New York Giants. So we love hearing what we're hearing right now from Daniel Jones, and even from the wide receivers. Kadarius Toney came in, and he looked like he was feeling a little bit better as from coming back from that hamstring and knee injury, as he was actually making some really nice cuts and moves against top corner of the New York Jets, Sauce Gardner, and we like what we hear from Kadarius Toney. And also, David Sills is making a strong case to make this roster and as well get some playing time during the regular season. I don't think he's going to start. I still believe with the return of Sterling Shepard, with Kenny Golladay, as well as Kadarius Toney here on the roster, that I believe the New York Giants are going to be playing those three guys as their starting receivers going forward. And unless we get some type of big-time surprise, Darius Slayton should still be on the roster and still should be getting some pretty good playing time with the New York Giants, as well as I think the rookie Wan'Dale Robinson. I think he's been slowed up a little bit with injury as well, but nothing serious. But I think that Wan'Dale Robinson now is going to get the opportunity to learn behind some of these veteran receivers, and he's going to get his snaps eased into the offense going forward. So I think Wan'Dale Robinson is actually in a good position where he's going to be more of that gadget type player for the New York Giants to begin the season, even towards the middle, which actually might be the best thing for Wan'Dale Robinson going forward. So that's just what's been going on with that. The defense, in terms of the defense, the defense is looking pretty good, though. Elijah Moore was cooking some of these secondary players in joint practice yesterday, so we don't love what we're seeing from that. But in terms of, the defense overall, the pass rush is still looking strong, though. We have to worry a little bit about the injuries now with the Azeez Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Ellison Smith, and if these guys are going to be ready going into the season. So that's just some of the question marks you see from those guys. But in terms of, the offensive line too, Andrew Thomas looks primed and ready to have a big-time year. And I've been one of the guys that have been saying I think Andrew Thomas is going to be in line for a Pro Bowl season this year. And I think he's going to, by the end of the season, he's going to be a top 5 left tackle in this league, barring any injury. I think Andrew Thomas right now looks poised and ready with everything you hear, everything you see. I really believe Andrew Thomas is in line for a big-time breakout third year, and he's going to be a Pro Bowl caliber player this year at the left tackle position. And Evan Neal, he's been looking a little bit better, though he is still struggling in terms of his pass protection. But Evan Neal looks strong right now in terms of his run blocking, and the New York Giants in general look really good in terms of their run blocking with the offensive line. And obviously we got a lot healthier coming back as John Feliciano, Joshua Zudu, Jameel Douglas. These guys have been making their way back to the practice field for the New York Giants. in terms of coming back from injury. So that's a good thing you want to hear, is that the depth on the offensive line is now returning for the New York Giants going forward. So that's one thing you love to hear for this team, is that they're starting to get a little bit healthier in terms of the offensive line. Even though the left guard position is a little bit of a question mark, at least the offensive line depth is getting a little bit better going forward. And finally, just some things I would like to see for the New York Giants as a little bit of a preview for the preseason finale against the New York Jets. Some of the players that are going to be highlighted in this game, of course, are some of the depth players like Trent Thompson, Yusef Corker, as well as Micah McFadden. Some of the wide receivers that are going to be out there. Travis Toivonen, who they just brought back. David Sills, Darius Slayton, C.J. Board. Though obviously he's not going to be playing, so I think C.J. Board is going to be on the outside looking in unless they really believe in his special teams ability. Richie James, some of these cornerbacks out there, Zion Gilbert, Darren Evans, Olaja Griffin. These guys are going to be out there trying to make their names out there and see if they can for one last time, try to catch the eye of Brian Dable, Wink Martindale, Mike Kafka, and this offense, defense, and special teams, Thomas McGahee, and see if they could possibly win a back-end roster spot for the New York Giants in terms of the 53-man roster going into the beginning of this regular season on September 11th. So I just want to see some of these depth players out there. I don't want to see any of the starters. We've seen enough of what we've seen in joint practices as well as the second preseason game. Rest the starters. Get them ready right now for the beginning of the regular season. I know it might be a little bit me contradicting myself from what I've said before, but I think I've seen what I need to see. The last preseason game is just about seeing what depth players you have right now on the roster and pretty much seeing what guys can go out there and show you something on the last preseason game and see who can make this 53-man roster heading into the regular season. So some of the names I want to see out there, as well as some offensive linemen like a Jameel Douglas, like a Josh Rivas, like a Roy Mbatika, Eric Smith, as well as a Will Holden. I just want to see what some of these guys can do on the roster going forward and see if they can maybe possibly show enough to some of these coaches on here on the staff and maybe make a back end of the roster spot going forward for the New York Giants. So that is just my injury updates, roster updates, as well as joint practices, news, notes, observations, as well as a final preseason preview for the New York Giants' last preseason game against the New York Jets on tomorrow at 1 p.m. at MetLife Stadium. So if you guys like this video, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already to NYG Jeffy T 3285 for more breaking news, updates, roster, and injury updates surrounding the New York Football Giants, as well as some updates around the New York Jets. Forget the New York Jets. New York Mets, Brooklyn Nets, WWE Wrestling, as well as some food for thought. Turn on the bell for notifications on when the next video or short is going to be dropping on the channel. And let me know in the comments section on some of the things that you've liked, including what you loved in joint practices this past Thursday, some of the injuries that you might be concerned about with the New York Giants, some of the transactional moves we've seen during this week, as well as what you would like to see in this last preseason game against the New York Jets, and what players you're highlighting that you hope can make one last impression to the coaching staff to possibly sneak on this New York Giants 53-man roster come next week, and as we get prepared for the beginning of the 2022 New York Giants regular season on September 11th against the Tennessee Titans. So everybody enjoy the rest of your Saturday afternoon/evening, and let's go New York Football Giants. Together blue, everyone.